What is up, my beautiful gemstones? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing Ouija board killings. Welcome to part 6 of my 7 Days of Halloween series, and I am actually filming the final 2 and trying to get them edited and out for tonight, which is Halloween night. So in this video, you're going to see me in the same outfit as the final video for this series. My voice is getting better. I'm feeling a lot better, but not quite 100%, but we've got to do what we've got to do. Now, I've spoken extensively here on this channel throughout many videos and live streams about why we should never ever use the Ouija board, not under any circumstances. I trained for 2 years on how to use it properly, and even now with me knowing how to protect myself and my surroundings while using the board, I still won't take the chance because the fact of the matter is, it's dangerous. It's like living in a bad neighborhood and going to bed at night with your lights on and your doors and windows wide open for anyone and everyone who passes by to wander through and help themselves to your home and whatever it contains that they want. Most people, non-believers specifically, believe that the Ouija board is nothing more than a fun, creepy board game. They don't believe that it's spirit that moves the board, or really that there's anything supernatural that's happening at all. Ignorance is bliss, I guess, right? The fact of the matter is that regardless of what you believe, the Ouija board is possibly and objectively the most recognized instrument of the paranormal community to this very day, and since a very long time ago when it was first marketed as a game for the whole family to sit around and play together. And by the way, it's still marketed that way, and now there are cheap boards on Amazon that you can buy that are specifically geared towards your very young children and that are gender specific. This is so incredibly dangerous, but anytime I try to mention or talk about this with people, they tell me I'm being dramatic because, after all, it's not like anyone has ever died from playing Ouija. Sure, there's been reports of people claiming they've been possessed by something that came from the board, and other tales of people who say they've been attacked by spirits that came from somewhere evil and beyond, but at the end of the day, no one has actually died from playing with the board. That we know of, right? I believe there are people. The fact of the matter is, the Ouija board is the connection between our world and the world between here and the beyond, and I have no idea about anything good that has ever lurked in any in-between place. And believe it or not, there are some stories of people who claim that the board itself has been responsible for the death of the people who use it. This doesn't mean the board itself went and killed people, but that it has and is very capable of compelling the people who use it to do just that. But there's another angle to this that I don't think we've really talked about, and that's what I'm going to be discussing here today. And that's actually what I brought you all here to discuss today. So without further ado, let's jump right in. But before we do jump right in, I just want to say that this particular series, this video, and most of what I do here on this channel is brought to you guys by my members. Ghost Dragon CW, Wendy Williams, Nutslap, Val SWPA, KC, Blue Crossroads, Hurricane Holly, Gary Reed, Slow Motion, Life with Bobby, Jared Crazy Indian, Mama Cindy Lee, Chris Jarvis, Let the Monsters In with Ryan Tremblay, Kelly Lewis, Multifaceted Jules, The Bat Mom, Black Dragon, Diane Boss, Alexander Unverhall, Cheeky Kiki, Divine Empathic Tarot, Vixen Doe, Heather B, Paranormal Pixie, and Aunt Edna, in no particular order. That's just the order, and I try to mix it up a little bit too with each video that they're in on my YouTube channel, or on the YouTube studio thing. So let's just jump right in now. Our first account happened in the fall of 1929 when 2 Seneca women from the Cattaraugus Reservation in western New York State, which is near Buffalo, New York, decided to sit down with the Ouija board and see what they could conjure up. Nancy Bowen was a 66-year-old herbalist and traditional tribal healer, and the other woman with her that day was 36-year-old Lila Jimerson, who was a school teacher on the reservation, and the women were using the board to summon a specific spirit. Nancy and Lila were trying to contact Nancy's recently deceased husband, who was also a tribal healer named Sassafras Charlie, and he had recently been found dead under strange and some suspicious circumstances. Later, they claimed that Charlie had in fact spoken to them using the board, and he said that he had been murdered by a woman named Clotilda. The spirit claiming to be Nancy's husband went so far as to give a description of his alleged murderer, and an address where it said they could find her. The address was in nearby Buffalo. Lila Jimerson knew Clotilda and said that she was the wife of a sculptor from Paris who was very gifted in his art. The husband's name was Henry Marchand, and he was currently on the reservation studying the culture of the natives there. Henry was known for creating dioramas that were incredibly realistic and detailed and looked more like three-dimensional mini scenes from history or nature, etc. He used all sorts of materials in his art and wax figures, with all of it being precisely and neatly arranged and then encased in glass. Henry had studied in Europe under the master sculptor Rodin, and he was very well respected in the community where he lived and on the reservation itself, as he had constructed beautiful and lifelike dioramas of Iroquois life at that time. These dioramas specifically were a popular attraction at the museum there in Albany, and he had been commissioned to make more so that they could be displayed at the grand opening of the Buffalo Science Museum, which was slated to be opened later on in that year in 1929. The purpose of Henry and his wife Clotilda living on the reservation at the time and not at their own home in Buffalo was so that Henry could research life on the res for the building of those specific and particular dioramas. But eventually he went back to Buffalo and went back to his job. Clotilda was an accomplished artist herself. She was a painter, and they had 4 children together who also lived on the res with them for the time being before going back to Buffalo. Lila said she had known the family for at least 10 years at that point and had a friendly and personal relationship with Henry because she had been one of his models for the diorama artwork. In the days after these 2 women had their session with the Ouija board, Nancy Bowen began receiving strange letters in the mail from someone calling themselves Mrs. Dooley, and the correspondence was quite bizarre, in my opinion. The mysterious author spoke more about the murder of Sassafras Charlie and what allegedly really happened to him. She said in the letters that Clotilda was actually a witch and that she had cast a curse upon not only Charlie, but his wife, Nancy, as well. One of the many letters said, quote, "I know something secret. I decided I'd better tell you and help you out. What I can. This is what I know. Charlie Bowen is killed by a witch in this city of Buffalo. It was from a French woman. She killed Charlie because he have good medicine to sell in city. Her witchcraft didn't work so good, so she decided to kill him. She killed many, many that way, Indians and white. But let me tell you more. She said she fixed another doll. The same this doll is his wife Nancy." End quote. By all accounts, Nancy took these letters very seriously, and she was certain that Clotilda had not only killed her husband, but that she was next. Nancy thought as well about how Clotilda was known to collect various types of mushrooms from the forest, and thought it all the more likely she was a witch due to that fact as well. I know that sounds strange, and while it was a common practice to collect herbs and mushrooms from the forest in Europe at the time, the natives in Buffalo had never done such a thing and thought it was odd right from the beginning. Nancy Bowen herself referred to mushrooms in general as, quote, "strange, hellish vegetables," end quote. By the time she had received a couple of these letters with everything else that had happened with the board and how the natives perceived the mushroom picking, Nancy Bowen was scared, convinced Clotilda was a witch, and knew she had to do something about it, plus to avenge her husband's death. Nancy went out and purchased chloroform and a hammer before heading to where the alleged witch was said to have lived, at the address given to her by the Ouija board. She was determined to kill the witch, avenge her husband, as well as put an end to the evil curse that was said to be now on her for once and for all. On March 7th, 1930, Clotilda, who by the way still had no idea that any of this was going on or had been said about her, went to answer some banging on the door of her home. When she opened the door, she was met with the sight of a woman whom she had never seen, pointing in her face and calling her a witch. Nancy Bowen immediately attacked the unassuming Clotilda, bludgeoning her to death with the hammer and shoving a chloroform-soaked rag down her throat just to make sure she was dead. Unfortunately and sadly, Clotilda's 12-year-old son, Henry Marchand Jr., found his mother's mutilated, dead body in the home when he returned home from school that day. He was obviously horrified and scared, and he immediately ran to the Buffalo Museum of Science to tell his father what had happened. It didn't take long for the investigators to discover that 2 native women who weren't from the area had been hanging around Clotilda's home earlier in the day. One was said to be much older than the other, and before long it was uncovered that Henry Marchand, despite his initial denials, I'm shocked, and Lila Jimerson had been having an affair. Henry continued to deny this, but eventually a whole bunch of love letters Lila had written to him were found, and Lila was almost immediately brought in and questioned as a suspect. She told the police about Nancy Bowen's involvement, and they were both arrested and charged with the murder of Clotilda Marchand. It turns out that Nancy had kept strips of bloody clothing from the murder along with Clotilda's earpiece and eyeglasses. Upon further investigation, the women admitted that on the day of the murder, Lila called Henry and asked him to take her for a ride in his car, and that's when Nancy knocked on the door and carried out the murder plot. The so-called Ouija board murder was a sensational story, and the news media could not get enough of it. They would refer to the native women, Nancy and Lila, as, quote, untamed squaws, end quote, and Nancy herself was being referred to also as the Hex Woman. The media did everything they could to really play up the black magic, hex, and curse angle of this story, and they talked nonstop about witches, the Ouija board, and the fact that the two women were natives, constantly referring to them as Indians. The news was overwhelmed with slurs and racism, but that's kind of just how it was at the time, and it was like the Iroquois people themselves as a whole were just as much responsible for the murder of Clotilda Marchand as the two women who actually dreamed up and committed the act. Death by association or something like that, I guess. The authorities raided the entire reservation for evidence and committed tons of illegal searches and seizures, and they were indiscriminate in their horrible treatment to the natives of the land. During the inevitable trial, Nancy Bowen claimed to have been under the possession of supernatural forces when she committed the atrocious act and blamed the Ouija board for that fact. She also insisted that it was Clotilda who had hexed her first and tried to kill her, as well as that she had killed her husband earlier. So she felt she had no choice but to take it upon herself to kill her, calling her the White Witch. Henry Marchand also came clean about his affair not only to Lila, but to dozens of other native women, which he very arrogantly told everyone was necessary for his diorama art. So he basically said he needed to sleep with all of these models in order to really get into the art of what he was doing. And he saw nothing at all wrong with any of it, in fact, bragging about all of the Native American women he had conquested. He also claimed that his wife knew about all of the affairs and had consented to them. As for Lila Jimerson, her defense attorneys tried their best to spin a tale of her being a jealous, scorned woman and said her involvement in the crime was due to her passion and rage at the whole situation with Henry and really had nothing to do with Clotilda. Nancy Bowen was seen as nothing more than a pawn in Lila Jimerson's plans to get rid of who she saw as the competition, the woman standing in the way of her being with the man she loved, though it's obvious to everyone but her that he didn't love her back and had been lying to her and so many other women just like her the whole time. Remember, Nancy really thought that the Ouija board had told her Clotilda was a witch and had murdered her husband. And she also didn't know that her good friend Lila was the one who was responsible for writing the Mrs. Dooley letters, which provided the rest of the alleged information about the victim. She was sad her husband had died and was looking for someone to blame, so her friend saw her as the perfect person to carry out her own murderous plot. Nancy had been too caught up in what was referred to as Iroquois witchcraft, even having used traditional weapons reserved only for evil spirits in the attack, and it was also said she really didn't understand the gravity of the entire situation. Lila Jimerson was being called the Red Lilac of the Cayugas in the media, and everything I just told you culminated in a mistrial when she collapsed in the courtroom due to some respiratory illness related to tuberculosis. While in the hospital, she confessed to second-degree murder, but when she was feeling a little better, she recanted that confession. The second trial started almost a year later in March of 1931. During the second trial, Lila's defense was that she had nothing to do with the murder in any way, shape, or form, and had not compelled her friend to do anything that she ended up eventually doing. It was also said that Henry had been begging many Native women to kill his wife for him because he was, quote, tired of her, end quote. Somewhat incredibly, unbelievably, Henry was allowed to just go back to Albany to move on with his life, and when he did, he immediately remarried. This time, he married his 18-year-old niece. At the end of the day, when all was said and done, Lila was acquitted of all charges, Henry was never charged with anything at all, and Nancy Bowen was tried, found guilty of manslaughter, and was sentenced to time served. Listen, guys, I believe wholeheartedly that the Ouija board could give someone information that could cause them to fly into a murderous rage because people believe that spirit either can't or won't lie to them. Also, I believe people could be possessed or compelled to carry out gruesome atrocities due to their involvement with the Ouija board. However, in this particular case, I personally believe it was Lila who moved the planchette to dupe her unassuming and naive friend into killing her lover's wife, possibly at his own behest, and that she used her friend's grief over the death of her beloved husband to dupe her. There was nothing supernatural going on here, even though the media did everything in their power to make sure that everyone thought that there actually was. And that's why, even in today's modern times, we have to be very careful which sources we place our trust in for certain and specific types of information. Though you should never, ever trust a Ouija board, because more often than not you are being lied to for one reason or another by whatever forces are within and surrounding it. You just shouldn't be using it, period. Like, that would be the least of your worries, that it lies to you. On November 8th, 1933, Dorothea Irene Turley and her 15-year-old daughter Maddie sat down to play the Ouija board game together in their home in Prescott, Arizona. Dorothea used the board regularly to get answers about all different types of things, and she believed every single thing told to her by the board was true. She believed in all of it. She had received financial advice from it and had even used it to try and find a cache of buried gold and treasure that was said to be buried near her home. It's unknown if she ever found that or not, but if I were a betting woman, I would say she didn't. But I digress. And anyway, during this mother-daughter bonding session, the board very slowly and clearly spelled out to Maddie that she needed to kill her father that night when he came in from milking the cows. Dorothea told her daughter that, quote, the board cannot be denied, end quote, and encouraged her to listen to what it said and follow its instructions, or bad things would start to happen not only to her, but to their whole family. The board assured the two of them that no one would ever find out about it. The women, just to be sure, went and consulted tarot cards to confirm the information that the board gave them as well, with the cards being pulled and interpreted by Dorothea herself for maximum assurance it was all being correctly done. Of course, I'm being somewhat facetious here, guys, because I'm sure most, if not all of you, can already see where this is going and what's going on here, but I'm reporting the information as it's written out in my source material. Once Maddie's father, Ernest Hurley, came in from milking the cows and started to go about doing his other chores inside the home for the night, Maddie took a nearby shotgun and blasted him with 2 shots into the back. At first, he clung to life bravely, but ended up dying in the hospital 2 weeks later. Both mother and daughter were arrested for the crime almost immediately, and that's when Maddie started saying that it had all been a horrible accident. She explained to investigators that she had been walking about 30 feet behind her father when she tripped, and that's how and when the gun accidentally went off. Twice, somehow. Obviously, the authorities didn't believe her story, and they had good reason for that. Ernest had been shot at close range, and twice in the exact same spot. Plus, the angle from which he was shot made Maddie's claims unrealistic at best. Finally, Maddie confessed that she had been under an evil influence from the Ouija board, and when it ordered her to kill her father, she was unable to resist the dark power it had suddenly cast over her. It came out in trial that Dorothea wanted her husband dead because she intended to run off with another man, and Dorothea herself was convicted of assault with intent to commit murder, and she received a sentence of 15 years to life. But just a few years later, in 1936, the Arizona Supreme Court overturned her conviction, and she was immediately set free. As for Maddie, who I feel very bad for because of how she was used and manipulated so greatly by her own mother, who I'm sure she loved, to do something so horrific to her own father, who I'm sure she also loved, she was sentenced to a state reformatory school and found guilty of attempted murder, but she was paroled after only serving 3 years. Let's move a little bit closer to our modern time and look at a case that happened in 1987, which ended with the murder of a Vietnamese immigrant named Ngoc Van Dang, who was only 25 years old at the time of his death. This story involves a group of friends who lived in Florida at the time and who were self-proclaimed Satanists who bound themselves not only to one another, but to their fascination with and belief in dark magic and the occult. These friends were 25-year-old Anthony Hall and his 16-year-old girlfriend Bunny Dixon, 18-year-old Elizabeth Town, and 24-year-old Daniel Bowen. It's a little bizarre that we now have 2 people who killed because of the Ouija board. Decades apart, but in different areas of the country with the same last name. Remember Nancy Bowen from the first story? Anyway, these friends were known to cast all sorts of spells and carry out dark rituals on a regular basis, and it was kind of known to just be what they did in their time that they spent together. It all seemed innocent enough despite the dark undertones of it all, and nothing sinister or bad ever really came out of it for a long time. However, 16-year-old Bunny Dixon would go out of her way to try and contact evil spirits and demons on a Ouija board, and she began becoming somewhat obsessed with doing so. She told her friends that she contacted a 10-year-old boy whose name was David, and that he had told her through the board to go on a road trip with her friends. She also said David instructed them to sacrifice a random motorist in order to fund on the trip. Little side quest here, guys. The 10-year-old spirit of a boy named David who is contacted through a Ouija board is also the basis of a horror movie from the 80s called Witchboard. And I know this because it's one of, if not the favorite of my mom's. Like, my mom absolutely loves this movie. I've watched it a million times. And conveniently enough, this movie had been released on December 31st, 1986, just a few months before all of this occurred. I don't know if it's connected or not, but it sure sounds like a big coincidence to me if it isn't. Like that Bunny Dixon saw this movie and got the information about the spirit at the very least and kind of reiterated it to her friends. In the movie, there's nothing about sacrifice or a road trip or anything, just the spirit of a little boy with the same age and name who is contacted through a Ouija board. So, back to the case, the friends all went along with Bunny and prowled around the streets of Orlando looking for their unlucky random victim before planning on joining a carnival in Virginia, also at the behest of the Ouija board, according to the 16-year-old girl. The two girls, Bunny and Elizabeth, walked around Orlando pretending to be hitchhikers in order to try and lure an unsuspecting victim into the group's clutches. Unfortunately, the first person to offer to help them was 25-year-old Gok Van Dang, and once Van Dang pulled over, the two boys in the group jumped out from wherever they were hiding and robbed him of $120 at gunpoint. And I said boys, but they were in their mid-20s, so men. The group tied the man up and shoved him into the trunk of his own car before taking off and heading towards a secluded area just north of Daytona Beach. When they finally reached their destination, Bunny Dixon carved an inverted cross into his chest with a knife she carried on her, which she claimed would properly mark him as a sacrifice. Daniel Bowen and Anthony Hall then shot him 7 times in the head, torso, and neck, killing him. They stuffed the body back into the trunk and then dumped it in a secluded area off of Interstate 95. Elizabeth and Daniel apparently couldn't handle the guilt of what they'd done, and at one of the stops on the way to Virginia, they called the authorities and confessed. They only said they had been witnesses to a murder, though, and they didn't tell the whole truth about their actual respective involvement. In short order, they were all arrested, and immediately Bunny said she had not been the one who carved the cross into the victim's chest, and Anthony Hall blamed the actual shooting on his girlfriend Bunny and Daniel Bowen. So, like true kids and true cowards, they all turned on one another immediately. However, the authorities thought that Anthony Hall had been the one who did the shooting, but he claimed that Daniel had held him at gunpoint and forced him to shoot so that he would actively participate in the crime along with everyone else and be just as culpable to ensure that he didn't tell. Sorry, guys, I am so clogged up right now. I'm trying to, just get the words out. Anthony also said that the only reason he had been involved in or went along with the scheme in the first place was because he had been under the influence of dark and demonic forces that had been brought onto him by Bunny and her Ouija board. Neither the authorities nor the jury were convinced of this bizarre story, and the whole group was convicted of robbery, kidnapping, burglary, and murder. They were all found guilty, and their sentences were as follows. Anthony Hall received a death sentence. Daniel Bowen received life in prison. 16-year-old Bunny Dixon, who in my opinion masterminded and orchestrated the whole thing, received 50 years, and Elizabeth Town got the lightest sentence with 17 years in prison. I could go on and on with stories of people who committed murders and claimed that it was due to the influence of the Ouija board, but the fact of the matter is, it just doesn't work like that. It's possible that something attached to the board could compel you to commit murder, sure, I guess, but only under very extreme circumstances because we all have free will, and once the board is away, the compulsion will lessen and our rational minds will start to take over. This is the reason for the quotes around the title of this video, the Ouija board killings, and I wanted to keep it short and to the point. But if you want me to revisit this subject and, bring you guys more cases, then let me know, and I will definitely do a part 2. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you're enjoying this series, and spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. A lot of the people who watch my videos regularly aren't subscribed. Look, we're already going together. Just make it official. Make sure your notification bell is turned on, okay? That's a big one. That is important. Check out the description box for some important links. If you think I should be paid for the work that I do here on this channel, then consider donating. PayPal, Cash App, my Amazon wish list, gift links, all of the links for all of my books, Kindle, Audible, and paperback should be in the description box, but if you're looking for a particular link or a particular title or something like that, just go to Amazon, type in Gemma Jade Books, make sure you rate 5 stars and leave a positive review. Leave a comment in this video as well, a positive comment preferably, but it really doesn't matter because engagement and interaction is engagement and interaction, and I really would like to start growing a little bit quicker. Check me out on TikTok. I'm trying to get the 1,000 followers over there so I can do a lot more, particularly with my spiritual gifts and abilities of mediumship and everything else that I do over here, just on a larger scale over there. I'm also on Instagram, but that's mainly for BTF publishing, even though I am learning how to use it. And you can hit me up on Facebook as well, and preferably follow me on Facebook. Check out the shorts. Be a supporter of my YouTube shorts if you aren't already, because that is what brings in the most views. And even the tiny amount of money I do make, most of it comes from the YouTube shorts. So I do appreciate, guys, when you share those out, when you like those, when you comment on those, when you watch them. I mean, you got to watch them in order to do all those other things. For any correspondence, to send in your own encounters with the supernatural, extraterrestrial, otherworldly, paranormal, for autographed copies of my books, literally anything or everything, email me at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. Be kind to each other, guys. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. If nobody told you today, you're amazing. You got this. Put the actionable steps behind your manifestations, because abundance is your birthright. I believe in you. I got your back. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger. Happy Halloween. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.